Hello and welcome to another edition of the Corner 3 here on Pittsburgh Sports Live. As always, I'm your host, Cale Berger, and we are in the thick of NBA playoff action, madness, whatever you want to call it, but it is the best time of the season if you are an NBA fan or just the casual basketball fan, that this is the time where you really start to hone in and figure out the storylines and start tuning in and enjoying this great basketball action that we're seeing here in the 2019 playoffs. If you are that type of person, welcome. Glad you're here. And going to do my best to catch you up on a few things here. But before I go and look at the three series that are tied 1-1, two in the East and one in the West, I want to touch on one of the stories that I think has been one of the most, polarizing ones over the last week or so here, but it's one that's gone back for over a few seasons now, and it really centers around the Houston Rockets and their last year's MVP, their star, James Harden. And James Harden, he has gotten a lot of flack, but especially over the first few games here of this Warriors series, for being a guy that, has a tendency to flop a little bit or try and look for foul calls, and he does whine a little bit, I will say. And kind of all the madness started after Game 1 of their series with the Golden State Warriors. It was a 104-100 victory for Golden State on Sunday. And the Rockets, well, after the game, they were, I guess you could say, they're really not pleased with the way the game was officiated. James Harden came out and said that they just wanted a fair chance. In the press conference, he said that he wants the officials to call the game that it's, quote, supposed to be called. And, what he was referring to in that was how Houston felt that there were about 8 3-point attempts that they thought that they were fouled on, which they know would have resulted in 24 free throw attempts, and they think that would have made a significant difference in what was a 4-point loss for the Rockets in Game 1. And if you do the math, obviously, 8 times 3, there's 24 opportunities that could have been at least from the free throw line, and I do understand their logic, but here's what I'll say. I think James Harden is a phenomenal player, and I think he fits perfectly in the scheme, in the play style, in the offense of Mike D'Antoni. What my problem, though, with James Harden is I feel like at times he's gotten fouled on 3-point attempts more than anyone in the league this year. I believe it's something like 50 more attempts that he's been fouled on from 3-point line than anyone else. One of those guys is Kemba Walker. That is in second for most times fouled on a 3-point attempt this season. He's got a knack for it. But I feel like there gets to a point now, and especially this happens in the playoffs, we've seen over the last few years, where James Harden, he focuses more on trying to get the call than on trying to make the shot. And what we see is he has this tendency sometimes to, I guess you can look at the film and look back at when he takes a wide open shot to when he has someone on his face. When he's got a wide open shot, it's a set shot, straight up in the air, straight down, and a good percentage of the time he makes it. When he has a guy in his face, you see it change on the film where James Harden decides to kick his legs out a little bit, or he lands about 2 feet in front of where he took off from. And, that is like pulling hairs there a little bit. But what he's trying to do clearly is draw the foul, try to get the 4-point play. But I think it goes two ways here. If you're angry with the way James Harden plays the game of basketball, a guy who has won an MVP last season, had a phenomenal year, and is right now neck and neck with Giannis Antetokounmpo for this year's MVP to become a consecutive winner of the award, or he's trying to do that. If you're upset with the way he plays the game, I think you should not be as upset with the player himself, but the climate, the officiating climate in the NBA, the current league. You should be more upset with the standards of the current NBA than you should be with the player himself. And why do I say that? Well, all James Harden is doing, because he was always a fantastic player in Oklahoma City, and when he came his first few years with the Rockets, he was great then as well. But what's changed for James Harden over the last few years is James Harden has realized that there are areas in the NBA, in the current game of basketball, in the way that the game is officiated, that he can exploit, that can make him that much better, that can make him just that more dangerous on the offensive end. And what do I mean by that? Well, I mean by the fact that we know that officials are going to call things differently for stars. There's no denying that James Harden is one of probably the 5 best players in the entire world. We also know that the NBA, I'm not going to say the NBA is soft because I disagree with that argument everyone tries to make, but we know that the NBA allows way less contact than they did even 10 years ago, especially 20 years ago, and don't even get me started on 30 years ago. Everyone says people were getting punched in the face driving in the lane. I doubt that, but still, you can't deny that it was a more physical game back then. The other thing, too, is the NBA has made one thing they've really tried to emphasize for officials is when a shooter goes up, you have to give them an area to land. You have to let them land unimpeded, coming down from that jump shot, and that has caused a spike in 4-point plays, in guys getting fouled on 3-point attempts, resulting in those 3 free throws. All James Harden has done is identified those areas where he can bend the rules, where he can take advantage of the rules, or use them to his own advantage, and frankly, perfected it. I mean, he has perfectly bent the rules to his advantage to make him one of the most dangerous offensive players that we have ever seen. And it's not just because the guy's got unlimited range, impressive handles, he can get by anyone, he can step back, he can get to the rim, he can do it all. It's not just because of that. It's because Harden has found a way to manipulate and twist those rules in a way that makes him just that much more dangerous, that gets him a ridiculous amount of free throw attempts every year. I believe he's led the league in free throw attempts the last 2 seasons, maybe even the last 3 seasons. Russell Westbrook behind him. So all James Harden has done is taken the current NBA and used it to his advantage and found a way to exploit the way that officials are going to call the game. I don't see a problem with that. As much as it might annoy people to see all the fouls that get called on Harden sweeping through when someone's covering him tightly on the perimeter, throwing up some wild shots just to get the call, I get that. But you can't deny that he has effectively and successfully taken advantage of the current NBA for his own game. And I respect that. And I acknowledge that just like in any other sport, we talk about the ways that Bill Belichick will use the rules and bend the rules to his advantage because that's the way the rules are written. It's exactly the same kind of thing that we're seeing in the NBA from James Harden. But what I will say is, you also can't be trying to draw the fouls more than you're trying to make the shot. And that's, I think, what we've seen a lot over the first two games of the series here, and very often from James Harden, is he tries to focus more on getting to the line than he does actually making the shot he is intending to shoot. And when we look back at this game 1, where they came out after the game and they said, that's 24 free throws, and well, maybe instead of complaining after the game, because I know that is the way that the Rockets make their money, it's the bread and butter for their offense, how about instead of complaining after the fact, just try to go out there and play? And I understand you can be frustrated with the officials, and the Rockets decided to release after game 1 this, audit, they're calling it, an audit of Game 7 last year in the NBA Finals, or in the Western Conference Finals. Looks like we're losing LeBron over here. Trying to keep LeBron around as we go deeper and deeper into this playoff season. But the Rockets had a historically bad shooting performance in last year's Game 7, and they, for some reason, felt the need they had to look back at the game and come up with a list of missed calls and how they got screwed out of the game. You know what? If you want to do some film study and see how the game is being officiated and maybe send that to the league after the game happens, or, use it with regards to film study internally for how your players can improve and try to avoid some of those instances, that's fine. But the Houston Rockets decided they were going to, hold on to that as kind of a trump card or a get out of jail free card and release that after game 1 when they felt that they were fouled clearly on 8 3-point attempts. They decided to come out and release that a year after the audit was originally done, or the game that this report was made about. So if you have a problem with the way a game was officiated a year ago, release that report after that game. Don't release that report a year later in a whole new season, in a whole new playoff series against that very same team as a way of trying to I don't know, take pressure off yourself or back up your new complaints about the officials. I'm not sure what the reasoning is behind that, but I'm all for looking into how a game is officiated and trying to make things better league-wide, but don't release some report a year later in a new season to try and back up your new grievances with the officiating and the way a new series against, albeit the same opponent, but the way a new series in a new season is being officiated. I just don't agree with that. I don't buy that. I don't support that. I think it's a waste of time. It's a waste of our resources. It's stupid to go back and retroactively bring that up and use that as kind of, I guess, proof that you got screwed over in game one when this is after game 7 of the previous year's series. It really just doesn't make sense to me. But on this whole James Harden and Rockets nonsense, I think there were instances in this game where the Rockets had, I guess, made a good point that maybe, Klay Thompson closing out on James Harden, he definitely gets underneath guys. Some of those should have been called. I'm not sure if all 8 should have been called, but I don't think that I definitely think that there were missed calls on three-point attempts in that game. And it definitely had an impact on the final score of that game. But don't be angry at James Harden because he is trying to draw fouls and he is using the rules to his advantage. He's just being a smart basketball player, frankly. And this goes back to the whole flopping epidemic in the NBA in general. Guys are smart enough to understand that the game is going to be called a lot less physically than it was 20 years ago. And they understand that the easiest shot on the basketball court outside of a dunk is a free throw. And why wouldn't you do everything in your power to help your team by getting easier shots? And they're called free throws. Basically, free points if you're a great free throw shooter like James Harden is, around 90% this season. So I have no problem with James Harden trying to bend the rules to his advantage. That's what any smart player would do. But I do have a problem with the Houston Rockets seemingly attempting to not really caring about making the shots and more caring about getting the free throws. That's what I have a problem with. But for everyone angry at Harden, be angry with the league. Don't be angry at the player. That's what they always say. Don't hate the player, hate the game. Because obviously the NBA has bred this kind of ultra sensitive climate for officiating, and that's why James Harden gets all these foul calls, because he's bending the rules to his advantage. And you know what? I applaud him for that and using those rules to his advantage to make him the best player he can be. But second topic here today, we have 3 series right now that are tied at 1 game apiece, and I want to kind of give my thoughts because I didn't do a show, obviously, in about over a week or so before these series started. I want to kind of give a rundown of who I think is going to come out on top and what advantages I think those teams have in these series. First one, Toronto and Philadelphia tied at 1 apiece. Well, first things first, Golden State obviously up 2-0, now heading back to Houston with Game 3 on Saturday. But first one I want to touch on, tied at 1 apiece, Toronto and Philadelphia. Game 3 of that one is tonight, back in Philly. And what I'll say here, I think this is a very important series, I think, for both teams. Both teams decided to go all in this year for the playoffs, just like a lot of teams in the East did, now that LeBron is kind of out of the way. I think this is more of an important series, though, for Toronto. And because I don't think Toronto has any legitimate shot of retaining Kawhi Leonard if they do not advance to the Eastern Conference Finals out of this series. Kawhi Leonard's been playing out of his mind. He has reminded us again why he is a top 5 player, why he's probably the best two-way player in the league. He has been absolutely phenomenal for the Raptors. And that supporting cast around them, Kyle Lowry started to pick up the slack when I ripped him apart 2 shows ago or 1 show ago, I'm not sure, but I ripped him apart and said he had to be better. He's been better. Pascal Siakam has been stellar, probably going to win Most Improved Player because he has been that good, and he's carried that into the playoffs. But I think the biggest thing for Toronto, and I think Toronto will end up winning this series, I think that the biggest thing for Toronto is they have to make sure that Kawhi Leonard keeps playing the same way that they are, and they have to do an impressive job on Joel Embiid. They have to send multiple guys at him. They have to make sure they're switching the right guys on a Joel Embiid. They have to make sure they're doing everything they can to make Embiid uncomfortable, a guy who's already not 100%, but is probably the second best player on the court in this entire series. They have to do everything in their power to shut down Embiid. As much as Jimmy Butler has been a hero and been a stud for the Sixers in this series thus far, especially in Game 2 when they knotted up the series at 1 apiece, and we lose LeBron again, partially, we'll let him fall if we have to. He didn't earn a spot in the playoffs this year. Jimmy Butler is not the guy that is going to win you the series. He's not the best player on the team. He's the second best player, but you need the dominant presence down low, Joel Embiid. If the Raptors are able to shut him down and limit him as much as possible, then I think the Raptors will advance to Eastern Conference Finals. If Joel Embiid starts to get a rhythm here, starts to play well, in addition to Jimmy Butler being the shot maker, being the closer that he is for the Sixers, I think the Sixers will advance. But I think the Raptors, with the way they're playing right now, Lowry's starting to get back into the fold, Ben Simmons still kind of a non-factor offensively, at least scoring himself, against a much better defensive team than the Brooklyn Nets in the Toronto Raptors. Whoever they throw at him is going to make things difficult. They've kind of made Tobias Harris just a three-point shooter. So this was kind of the worst possible matchup for the Sixers, I would say. And I think that if the Raptors are able to limit Embiid and, you know what, let Jimmy Butler do what he has to do, but make things difficult for Ben Simmons as well, the way the Nets did in that first round series in the first few games, I think then the Raptors will advance on to the Eastern Conference Finals. In doing so, I think that seals that they will get Kawhi Leonard in the offseason to sign with them in long-term free agency. And then if they're able to do that, I think they'll be able to make a move for potentially Anthony Davis, and they get a core that is one of the best in the NBA going forward. But that is obviously off-season talk, a discussion for another day. But I think that re-signing Kawhi Leonard all depends on them being able to win this series over probably the best team on paper in the East. If they're able to do that and get to the Eastern Conference Finals and potentially a finals berth for this team, I think that is a lock for them to retain Kawhi. The second series I want to touch on, we're going to go over to the West now, and this is Denver and Portland was able to get the win last night in Game 2 to tie it up at 1 game apiece, and not having the same kind of stellar Damian Lillard star performance that we were seeing in the first round series against the Thunder, but what we're seeing from the Trailblazers is everyone is starting to step up on the team outside of Dame. You know, it was really just the Damian Lillard and I guess somewhat CJ McCollum show against the Thunder. Now in Game 2, we saw 6 guys in double figures. Enes Kanter has been a godsend for them with the injury to Yusuf Nurkic. I mean, he has been so good offensively. Rebounding the basketball, he has been a stud. And he's been putting some great work down low against Nikola Jokic, who had a great season, was an MVP candidate for a long time this season. So I think the key for Portland here, if they want to win this series and come out on top and move on to the Western Conference Finals, they need to have that supporting cast step up. In addition, though, they need that to happen, but they also have to have Dame get back to the Damian Lillard that was hitting, 35-foot game winners, 40-foot game winners from the logo. The Damian Lillard that was trash-talking Russell Westbrook, that was working him up and down the court. Dame's got to get back to that. Dame's got to find his shot once again. Dame's got to find that swagger once again and play to the level that we all know he can play, to the point where he was the best player up until the first, last game. He was the best player in the playoffs so far, the way he'd been playing. He was playing at an elite level, looking like probably the second best point guard in the entire league behind Steph Curry. And he's kind of fallen back to earth a little bit here. So if Dame can step up, and this supporting cast of Rodney Hood, of Kanter, of CJ McCollum, of Aminu, Evan Turner, if those guys can all continue to be playing great basketball and contributing on the scoreboard as well, I think the Trailblazers will be able to win this series and move on to the finals. But Denver's playing some great basketball right now. They're able to squeak past the Spurs in Game 7. And I think, though, that they have the best. I think they're the more talented team, although I think Dame is one of the best players in the entire league and probably the second best point guard right now. They have Jamal Murray. They have Gary Harris. They have Paul Millsap. They have Nikola Jokic, who's, like I said, was an MVP candidate for a large portion of the season. If I think they have the better team on paper. I think they're the deeper team, but I think that I would still say that the best player on this team in this series is Damian Lillard. I think a really close 1B would be Jokic, but I think there's a better supporting cast around Jokic than there is around Damian Lillard. So unless the Trailblazers are going to be able to get Damian Lillard going, get the supporting cast to continue firing on all cylinders the way they were in Game 2, if that doesn't happen, I think the Nuggets will win this series because I think they're deeper. I think they have just so many guys that can beat you. They have Jamal Murray, who's been so good in, I believe, his second or third year in the league. Gary Harris is great on both ends. He's a great defender, and I think he's been a big portion of why Damian Lillard's had some struggles is because of the defense of Jamal Murray and Gary Harris. But they have the calming force of Paul Millsap as well, and Jokic that can do so much, that is a great rebounder, a great scorer, that gets so many other guys involved. The way they have him as a facilitator to get all of that depth working in unison and playing good basketball, I think unless the Trailblazers get some things going and get Dame to start playing the same way he was, I think the Nuggets will win this series and advance to the Western Conference Finals. And the last series here, Boston and Milwaukee. And this series is interesting to me because these are, once again, two teams that think that the East is wide open for the first time in a while. Giannis likely going to win the MVP, and he's had a phenomenal season thus far. He leads the Bucks in points, rebounds, assists. But I still feel like, to an extent, it is the Giannis show, similar to Dame's situation in Portland. I still feel like it's Giannis and kind of everyone else on this team. I mean, Chris Middleton was obviously an all-star, but it's Eric Bledsoe, who had that difficult series last year going up against Terry Rozier. And this is a team that I know has added guys in Brook Lopez, Dante DiVincenzo, Nikola Mirotic. They've added pieces, but this is still a team that is largely intact from last season. A team that fell to the Celtics without Kyrie Irving, without Gordon Hayward. So now the Celtics are back full strength, and a team that I feel like is starting to finally hit its stride. They got that sweep of the Pacers in the first round, which I didn't expect at all, but they played phenomenal basketball. They got the win in Game 1 over Milwaukee until Milwaukee came back and won 123-102 with that big 21-point victory in Game 2 at home. I feel like Boston is the better team. I still feel like Milwaukee has kind of this hump to get over where we know Boston is so good defensively. We know how much trouble they've given Giannis in the playoffs over the past few seasons. They pack things in, they make things difficult, and they make him shoot jump shots. And although he can get to the rim against everybody, I think Boston is content with, if Giannis beats us, he beats us, but we're going to lock down everyone else and pack in and make everyone shoot jump shots in this team and eliminate the perimeter threats of Milwaukee and, basically force someone else to beat us and make Giannis shoot difficult shots, which has been the recipe for Giannis' entire career, even though this season he's been making them at a higher clip than he ever has. I think that Boston, though, on paper, even though Jason Tatum has been playing some very lackluster basketball. I mean, he scored under 10 points. He's failed to get double digits in this series already through 2 games, even though he's been a guy who's supposed to be taking on the torch from Kyrie Irving going forward and had that phenomenal playoff run last year, had a good season thus far. He has not picked up the slack yet, but still, Boston's been playing some good basketball. And Boston's been playing good defensively, and they finally, like we talked about on the last show, they finally found some defined roles. Al Horford is going to be the do-it-all defensive stopper man for them. Kyrie Irving's going to be the scorer, the hero, the late-game closer, as he always should be, one of the clutchest players currently in the NBA. And everyone else is going to take a step back and, kind of be a role player, because frankly, that's probably what the other guys in this team should be at this point of their career. As much as I love Gordon Hayward should be the third option, or a guy who is the sixth man on this team, as he's been. Hayward has been the sixth man. He hasn't been the starting lineup. They've inserted Marcus Morris into that starting lineup role, and he's been giving them a lot. He's been giving them 9 points, and this is in game 1. Gave him 9 points, gave him 7 rebounds, no turnovers, 3 blocks. He's going to be a great defensive guy, and just another guy, as I guess we lose LeBron even more back here. LeBron doesn't like us talking about the East when he's not a factor in it. Marcus Morris has been inserted in that lineup, and just another guy that they can throw at Giannis, another body, another good defender, and also a guy offensively that can shoot the basketball, that can make difficult jump shots. I mean, he can do kind of everything you need him to do as a role player in that lineup. Tatum, though, has to be better. And I think that the Bucks will win this series if it is just the Al Horford and Kyrie Irving show. As good as Jaylen Brown has been, coming on strong here, 19 points in game 1, if it's just Kyrie Irving and Al Horford and no one else stepping up for Boston, then I think that this ends up being a win for the Bucks, and I think the Bucks advance to the Eastern Conference Finals because they do have that good supporting cast. Boston's been doing a good job of packing things in and trying to shut guys down. I mean, they didn't do that well in Game 2 where Middleton went off for 28, but they made Giannis go 7 for 15. Giannis took 4 3-point shots and hit 2 of them, so they're trying to make him shoot jump shots. But if Boston is able to get other guys to step up, and it's not just Kyrie Irving and Al Horford, because Kyrie Irving had an abysmal game in Game 2 where they lost, where he was 4 of 18, 1 for 5, 3 turnovers, minus 19 and plus minus. If other guys can step up, including and especially Jason Tatum, who had 5 points, if they get the other guys to step up and Boston gets back to those defined roles, which I feel like they found, they just need guys to hit shots. If they get back to those defined roles with everyone, with all this other talent, not taking shots away from Kyrie Irving and Al Horford, but adding to the production of those guys, I feel like Boston will be in good shape. But it comes down, as I guess that means we're wrapping things up here on the corner 3. We'll try to get some better duct tape. But I feel like it has to be Jason Tatum that has to step up for Boston. If Jason Tatum, the guy who was so coveted by the Pelicans when they were trying to trade Anthony Davis to the Celtics, the guy who everyone was crowning as the next great young player in the NBA in the offseason, he had a good season, but this is when it counts. It counts in playoff time. And unless Jason Tatum's able to step up, then I think the Bucks will advance, win this series, and I think Giannis will win an MVP on his way to the Eastern Conference Finals. But that's going to do it for us here today on another edition of the Corner 3 on Pittsburgh Sports Live. As always, make sure to subscribe on YouTube at Pittsburgh Sports Live. Helps us out a lot. Follow along with everything we do covering Pitt, Duquesne, the NBA, the Steelers, the Pirates, everything. They're on Pittsburgh Sports Live on YouTube. And also follow us on Twitter at Pittsburgh Sports Live to stay informed and follow along with all the latest content we're putting out. Follow me on Twitter at Cale_Berger. If you want to follow my basketball thoughts, my ramblings, any of my other things that I do, my writing, my broadcasts, or some of the dank memes that I share regarding Game of Thrones, you can check them out there. But once again, it's been the Corner 3 on Pittsburgh Sports Live. I'm your host, Cale Berger. We'll be back next week.